Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Stephani Dale and David Edgar's play, A Time to Keep. Now, I love this play. It checks a lot of my boxes for things that I'm really interested in a play. So this is an example of theatrical monsterism, which is a genre that developed sort of in the late 90s and really sort of hit its peak in the early 2000s in Britain. And basically, monsterism involves large casts. It deals with big issues, big ideas. So these are not domestic plays. These are sort of publicly oriented plays. They tend to deal with historical events. Or to be set in history. And this one, in fact, is. This is about a play put on in 1804 in Dorset, basically about the history of the town. So that's one of the two major threads of this play, is of A Time to Keep, is the play within a play, where they put on the Dorset history play. The other is a love triangle wherein Mary Strickland, who's the daughter of a sort of important, influential family, is supposed to marry her sort of skeezy... I don't know, it's hard to get a read on William Strickland. He's her cousin, her distant cousin. He has a stammer, and so for that reason, everybody's like, oh, he doesn't have any, like, social charm or anything like this. But on the one hand, he seems like a fairly genuine, decent guy, but on the other hand, he seems kind of sketchy, because he finds out that Mary is having an affair / romance with Isaac Gulliver, who is a free trader, which is the fairly charitable euphemism that the smugglers in the play use for themselves. So he's lower class, no money, no name, criminal, etc., etc. Star-crossed lovers, basically. Mary Strickland and Isaac Gulliver. William finds out about it, and he basically turns in Isaac to the police. So that's, not great on William's part. So that's the other storyline. We've got the play within the play, and we've got the star-crossed lovers. Star-crossed love triangle, I suppose. So the play is very, very interesting. And one of the things that I find actually most interesting about the play is the communal aspect of it. This was done in community theater, and there's actually a line here that I think in a way sums up the ethos of this play's approach to performance. Or a guy named Henry, who's the son of Old Lee. Old Lee owns the local theater. Henry's got a sort of half interest in the theater. And he supports the play within the play, whereas Old Lee does not. But Henry says at one point to Jenny, who's directing the play and really the driving force behind this, he says, as you say, the theater is a collaborative art. Now, first off, I totally agree with that sentiment, but I think it's actually a really interesting reflection of the approach that this play takes. And so I want to read you the first part of a note on characters and casting, which is printed at the beginning of this edition, and this is the Nick Hearn Books edition. So it says, the Dorchester Community Plays Association insists that everyone who wants a part in one of its plays gets one. As a result, the cast size concertinas in and out, usually out, during the writing and rehearsal process. Our first draft had a cast of 92. Our second draft went down to 84. It's a tribute to Dorchester's 4 previous community plays that we were inundated with volunteers for this one. Against all our instincts and usual practices, we found ourselves needing to add rather than to subtract characters from the cast, asking if so-and-so couldn't have a sister or a servant or 2 servants or a mother or a child. As a result, the character list contains over 115 names. Jesus, that's a ton of people. It goes on in this book for 6 pages. The character list with brief descriptions of people. Then the note goes on to say, while all of them are important, almost all are real historical people, it's clear that in any subsequent production the story could be told with fewer. In particular, we've increased the number of smugglers, whist players, and prisoners in the performed draft. Although these groups seldom appear with anyone else, we have not had to double except for parts played by the chorus. So basically there is 115 people in the cast of the original production of this in 2007. That's nuts. But that's also theatrical monsterism, this idea of big performances, big productions, large casts, and taking on big public-oriented ideas. So I love it. I love the idea of it. And I love the idea that the Dorchester Community Plays Association gives everyone a part if they want it, even if it's just a small part, like even if you're just sort of on stage being a smuggler or a prisoner or whatever it is. Another thing that I love about this play is the meta-theatricality of it. If you're a regular viewer of this channel, you'll know that I'm big into meta-theatricality. Act 1, the prologue, we start right from the beginning with meta-theatricality. So basically, the prologue starts with a procession led by General Garth and General Charles Fitzroy, wherein King George III enters the theater and takes his seat. Yeah, we start with a royal procession. The stage direction, and this is partway into the scene after Garth and Fitzroy have basically announced the king's arrival and the queen's arrival, the princess's arrival. It says, everyone bows as the royal party enters. King George, Queen Charlotte, the princesses Augusta, Mary, and Sophia, followed by their ladies-in-waiting, Elizabeth Waldegrave and Caroline Waldegrave. They make their way to the royal box and sit. Everyone applauds. The conductor raises his baton to start the music when King George raises his finger. The music stops after 2 notes. King George then blows his nose, and he nods to the conductor who conducts the opening fanfare. The curtain rises and a woman dressed in a rough-and-ready man's costume walks onto the stage. She is Jenny Hodge, joined by the chorus. I love it. I love that King George III is showing up, and this is part of the play. But in 1804, this is the kind of thing that would have been standard for any performance attended by the monarch. And supposedly George III was a fan of the theater. So any performance that he attended, there would have been a procession in. And if he wanted to, for instance, blow his nose, everything would have stopped until he was done doing that. Then we have a prologue in verse, somewhat Shakespearean. Jenny says, good gentles and most gentle majesty, a fanfare heralds high solemnity. So who is this poor creature to aspire to act as prologue in this mean attire? And then we get the chorus, and they sort of, the chorus and Jenny go back and forth and sort of introduce the idea of the play, and the idea that this is about the history of Dorset. And then, at the end of the prologue, according to the stage directions, suddenly the voice of an irascible and gouty old man booms out. He's the Earl of Dorchester in a wheelchair pushed on by a long-suffering servant, Benjamin. As he speaks, the setting transforms from the play into a public meeting. And the Earl says, a play? At this moment of utmost peril, as our island people stands alone against the full might of Napoleon and his Gallic hordes, we are summoned to discuss the presentation of a play? And so this is the first... So Act 1 takes us back 2 months earlier, And we get this great transition. The Earl gives us this great transition between the meta-theatrical opening of the play and the starting point of the play within the play. Because there's a lot of opposition among the great and the good of the town to doing this play. The wealthy are not particularly interested in the play being put on, in part out of ostensibly patriotic concerns about the Napoleonic Wars and the danger faced by the nation at that particular moment. They see performing a play as wasteful. But the community prevails. And it is this community kind of performance where Jenny is really the driving force, but a number of individuals come and say, I'm interested in being involved. And the chorus sort of sums up the situation here. They say, and despite the half-hearted response of the greatest figures in the town, this is a sort of summation of what's happened. Miss Hodge produced a bill informing the gentry and citizenry that all those with a talent for the thespian arts were invited on the 17th of July, 1804, to attend at the upstairs room of the Antelope Hotel, the hire of which would be affrayed by means as yet unresolved, for a grand audition. So, I mean, this is what we get here. This is a community-driven play. It's being run on money that will be gotten somehow at some point. There are no resources. There's not a space for it, etc., etc. And that's a lot of what the first roughly third of this play is about, of A Time to Keep is about this sort of process of auditioning actors and not having money to pay for the hotel or the room in the inn that they've booked for these auditions and things like this. But there's a lot of cool stuff that goes on here. And one of them that really strikes me is this character named Catherine Mansfield, who is the wife of the mayor. Now, she comes in to audition. So Jenny says to Henry, Mrs. Mansfield oversees a millinery establishment in South Street. Elizabeth Meach says, and is married to the mayor. Henry says, Mrs. Mansfield, have you read the speech? Catherine says, yes. Can I presume the character who delivers it is a major figure in the play? Jenny says, of course. We're hearing many people for all parts. Catherine says, but not everyone is married to the mayor, who is, of course, presently considering whether to support this venture. And Elizabeth Meach says, we take your point, Mrs. Mansfield. Jenny says, now perhaps. Catherine, suddenly, with a great gesture, melodramatically, says, Mother, do you not remember how you... I didn't do a great gesture, I'm sorry. But, Mother, do you not remember how you were absent for most of my abandoned childhood? Do you not recall how at my finishing you sent me to the capital? Was it not you who presented me a glittering jewel box? Jenny says, Catherine says, and then slammed it. Henry says, Mrs. Mansfield. Catherine says, shut upon my fingers. Of course, once rehearsed, I would do it all with considerably more passion. Elizabeth Meach says, thank you. Catherine says, Mr. Lee, do you have any immediate response to my performance? And all eyes turn in Henry's direction. Henry says, we have certainly seen nothing quite like it. Catherine says, thank you. So I love that passage. I think it's brilliant because this is Hyacinth Bouquet from the British sitcom Keeping Up Appearances. If you've never seen that show, it's hilarious and it's amazing. It's about this woman who is very like lower middle class, but she has these pretensions and aspirations to be an elegant society lady. But her attempts to do so are constantly thwarted through a combination of her very, very working class family, extended family, partially extended family, her sisters and her brother-in-law, but also through her own sort of general cartoonish sense of what it means to be elegant and sophisticated. That's Mansfield. right here. That's Mrs. Mansfield. She is Hyacinth Bouquet. So that all goes on. The other plot picks up at some point where Mary Strickland is not interested in William Strickland, but she does become interested in Isaac Gulliver. They have a bit of a thing. She convinces him to not only join the play, but to bring them smuggled stuff like silks and lace for costumes. That goes on for a while. And then finally, at William's snitching, Isaac is arrested. He's going to be executed for being a smuggler. But he gets a temporary reprieve because King George... I'll talk more about King George III in just a second, because I think he's delightful in this play. He makes me so happy. But Isaac gets a temporary reprieve from the king to come back and perform the play. And interestingly enough, in the play, there's a section, the only section we really get much information about the execution of Mary Channing, who was a Dorset woman who was forced to marry a grocer who she didn't really like and she found really boring, and so she poisoned him, possibly at the behest of her lover. And so William is playing the poisoned husband, Mary Strickland is playing Mary Channing, and Isaac is playing the lover. And so at the end of the play, when Mary Channing is about to have her neck broken and then be burned at the stake, she has this speech where, like, she basically says, yeah, I killed my husband, but, you know, I can't have a life with my lover now. And Mary Strickland uses that speech, that speech of Mary Channing's, with improvisations to basically say to Isaac, we can't be together. So again, we've got that great meta-theatrical moment where art not only imitates life, but art is life. And I love that. I love that idea. So she has this speech. And again, this is a character who's about to be executed. And she's thinking of the things that she wants to say to people. She says, then to my husband. There's some stage directions and stuff. She said, who, if he were here, this is what I'd say. Music, stage directions, music as William appears in front of her. You offered me all you had, but it wasn't enough for who I had become. I'm sorry I could not, and never could, love you. She looks around, sees Isaac as Mary's lover, maybe there, maybe in her mind. And to the man who told me I could ride and dance, who offered me the sands of Egypt and the wide plains of America, to the man who makes me want to fly, and it says Mary is leaving the script. George Kilmanraghi and others are worried about what is happening. You will always make me want to stretch my wings, to fly, to dance, but now I speak in a clear voice. We cannot fly together. I cannot tear up my life so far and write a new one. More concern about her going off script, but for all that, we are not parting. The things we did, the marriage of our spirits, will be ours to keep forever. Whatever burdens I must carry, whatever perils I must face, you will touch everything I do. It's this beautiful goodbye to Isaac, spoken on behalf both of Mary Channing and of Mary Strickland, and I think it's a wonderful moment. I think it's really touching. And then Isaac leaves. He manages, as far as we know, to escape arrest on his way out. In part because King George III once again saves him, because the excisemen who have arrested Isaac and have come to this play specifically because he's performing in it, and they're going to arrest him immediately afterwards. King George prohibits them from leaving while the play is going on. But that's, like, King George is one of my favorite characters here. And I have a soft spot for King George III anyway, but in this play he's just so delightful because he just sweeps in places and is this, like, jolly good fellow who's just, like, pleased to meet everybody. And his German wife comes along and in German is like, what are we doing here? We have stuff to do. We have to go. Stop doing this pointless, stupid stuff. And then his daughters come in and they're like, ugh, we have to go review more soldiers, or we have to meet this mayor of this town, or whatever it is. Oh, but we're also kind of flirty, because we're the princesses and whatever. And so it's this delightful thing. He just, like, sweeps in, sweeps out, sweeps in, sweeps out. It's like the first time that, other than that meta-theatrical prologue, the first time he shows up, Isaac and Mary are digging up some contraband that's been hidden in a field. And King George, they don't know that it's King George at the time, but this guy just sort of shows up and is like, hey, why are you guys digging in a field in the middle of the night? And they're like, oh, we're laying pipes to run water places. And he's like, wow, that's super interesting. You guys are great. Like, you're my best friends now. And then his German wife shows up and is like, get back in the carriage. We've got to go. And the princesses show up and they're like, ugh, we don't want to go do this thing we have to do. Hey, Isaac, you're kind of sexy. And it's just this great moment. Like, I'm not doing it justice, but I don't want to read the whole thing to you. But then, like, toward the end of the play, in Act 2, Scene 6, there's been a breakout where Isaac has escaped with the help of the other smugglers at Mary Strickland's behest. And they're fleeing in a cart, and they crash into another carriage, and it's King George's carriage. And he's just like, yeah, whatevs. I don't even care that you crashed into my cart. Hey, guy from the field, digging the water pipes. Great. Oh, you're in this play? Come on, get in my royal carriage and we'll all go together. And it's like this delightful thing, because these three excisemen show up, and they're basically like, in the king's name, we've got to arrest this guy. And the king's like, yeah, but I'm the king, and I want him to go do this play. I'm sure he's fine. Don't even worry about it. So it's just, he's such a jolly dude who's just, like, breezing through life, being the king, not concerned about, like, anything. He's just doing what he wants, going around being a good guy, and I love it.